Before I start, I want to just recognize that um, I just wanted to acknowledge Bell Hooks' passing earlier this week. Um, she was an amazing person, writer, activist, and she was also kind of my entree into Buddhism. I'd been trying to meditate for a while, but I read something she wrote 25 plus years ago in Lion's Roar Buddhist magazine. Actually, I read it in another magazine and then I sought her out. And so she passed away earlier this week. So she kind of was a part of my way in. And what I want to do is just read a couple of quotes from her that I find so important. And I use them a lot, especially when I'm talking about an undefended heart, which is kind of how I like to see the world or frame practice. And she says, when we choose to love, we choose to move against fear, against alienation and separation. The choice to love is a choice to connect, to find ourselves in the other. When we drop fear, we can draw nearer to people, we can draw nearer to the earth, we can draw nearer to all the heavenly creatures that surround us. Some powerful words about choosing love and choosing to drop fear. Not always easy, but ever so important. So I just wanted to lift that up. Thank you. And what my topic for tonight is around intentions, because it's that time of the year. It's the end of the year, and people oftentimes do New Year's resolutions for, you know, fixing themselves, to use a term, making changes in their lives so that they're better people, or they look better, or whatever, or healthier. Most of the time it's fine. Most of the time they're harmless. Most of the time, in fact, it's almost a joke that people make New Year's resolutions, and the joke almost do bets on how long it's going to last, because sometimes they can seem, I think sometimes they're disconnected with, if we're doing a behavior that's not healthy or not doing something that's beneficial, and we just make a resolution, we lose touch with what's really underneath it, and what's causing the unwise behavior, or the doing the stuff that's not beneficial. So it's also a very reflective time of year. We're in the darkness. The solstice is next week, and so that's often the time of moving towards the light again. A lot of the holidays around now use lights as an acknowledgement of that consideration, that awareness of that time. So what I wanted to do is talk about intentions, but not resolutions, but intentions more in the Buddhist sense. And I'm doing on New Year's Eve a New Year's Eve intention setting, and I've been doing that, participating in them for a long time. I think 2006, 2005 or 6 was the first one I ever attended, and it was really powerful. But it's intention as opposed to resolution. And because, as I said, intention is oftentimes resolution is, I'm going to be better, I'm going to lose 20 pounds, I'm going to go to the gym 5 times a week, I'm going to read a book every other day, I'm going to do all these things that we set ourselves up. And I don't know if I ever kept a resolution that I ever made, because they were so outlandish. I had this craving to be better on the outside, or I thought if I did that, then life would be better. And so it's really externally focused in some ways, trying to achieve something out there that will make me feel better in here. And so instead, I think what is more beneficial is to reflect on on kind of I think the teaching of the Buddha is a way to begin to reflect on this. And his teaching, bottom line, was very simple. He taught the nature of suffering and the end of suffering. And so what intention is I think can be a reflection on what's troublesome in my life, what's troublesome for me, and how do I move towards in a direction that takes me away from what causes that discomfort, what causes that trouble, or what that causes that pain. And oftentimes there's a phrase that we hear a lot saying that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, but that's not a Buddhist concept. In fact, Hanasaro Bhikkhu, who's a monk outside of San Diego, often called Tanjef, wrote a piece called "The Road to Nirvana is Paved with Skillful Intentions." And so skillful as opposed to good. And what he suggests is that skillful intentions are those that will that will give good results, positive results, beneficial results, wholesome results, in order to use to use a Buddhist term. It's not that the intentions are good, but what's behind them. What's the intention behind the intention, so to speak. It's like, going to the gym may be a beneficial intention or resolution, but what's underneath it? It's so I can look good, so I can be powerful, so I can build up muscles, so that you'll like me, so that I'll fit into this nonsensical idea of the perfect body or whatever it is. Or am I going because I feel that it would benefit me and I'm starting to get aches and pains, and maybe this would be helpful in some way, shape, or form. So hopefully that there's a distinction that you can get there, that I made clearly enough. It's like, what's underneath what we're doing? And the reason I want to talk about intentions, I want to talk about intentions with a different kind of framework as well. Buddhism offers a lot of different lenses and containers to hold this practice. There's the Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truths. But one other teaching that I absolutely love is the Paramis. And what the Paramis are is this list of 10 qualities that are suggested we work with in order to, or that are necessary in order to become enlightened. They're not they're not a teaching that the Buddha gave in any of the suttas. He didn't sit there and say, here are the 10 qualities you need to develop. But he did talk about these qualities in various ways, and they were kind of put in a list form later. And just to acknowledge that there are so many different lineages and so many different schools in Buddhism. And in Theravada, which is what I'm teaching, the older Buddhism, early Buddhism and the lineage of the elders, there are 10 of these Paramis. And Mahayana, later school, there are 6 of them, and they're called Paramitas. You don't need to know that, but I just wanted to acknowledge that in case you see somewhere it's like, why is it 6 instead of 10? So, so this is a really useful framework, I find, to craft an intention to move forward. It's a way to develop what we might need in order to walk away from suffering. And it's really good because you don't have to be a monastic. You don't have to go through any kind of gyrations. These are these are qualities that we can all work on. In fact, Tanjef, the monk, says they're a useful framework for developing a fruitful attitude towards daily activity. So they're this useful framework. So what are they? As I keep talking about them: generosity. And you've heard these all before: generosity, virtue, sila, ethical behavior; renunciation, letting go of what doesn't serve; wisdom, seeing things clearly; energy, this willingness, this effort to keep doing the practice, letting go of what doesn't serve; truthfulness, speaks for itself; determination, that staying the course; loving kindness; and equanimity, really, really powerful. Equanimity is the last of many, many lists. It's that place we want to get to, that ability to be with life as it unfolds. And these help to develop wisdom and compassion. The two factors of a wise heart that's necessary to end suffering. And Sylvia Boorstein has written a book called, I'm glad I wrote it down because I never remember it. It's called Pay Attention for Goodness Sake. And she wrote this about the Paramis. And she calls them the natural inclinations of the human heart. They're the natural inclination of the human heart, that when we are stripped of our greed, when we're stripped of our aversion, our hatred, our anger, when we're, clear the dust out of our eyes and there's no more delusion, then these are qualities that naturally arise. But because we have been so conditioned, and we can be so trapped in our fixed views of seeing the world in a certain way, that we sometimes need to support these qualities, support their growth, just as we do with loving kindness, with the loving kindness and compassion and joy practices. It needs a little support to get us moving in that direction. So these paramis are a container to hold our intentions. And they're not linear in that you have to start with generosity and get really good at being generous before you move on to ethical behavior. They kind of, it's another way to look at them and go and say, start where you are. What may be causing the most discomfort at this point in time? Speaking of patience, some of us may be very patient. We can sit with, annoyances and not get, bent out of shape. Most of us are in LA, and there's a hell of a lot of traffic again, all of a sudden. It's like, it's worse, it seems, than before the pandemic. There was the pandemic, when the heart of the pandemic, when there was nobody on the road, and it seems to have just kind of gone into hiding and multiplied and come out again. So patience is required, is necessary. So some of us have a lot of patience, but perhaps we're selfish, or it's difficult for us to be generous. And so when we look at these qualities, it's not about being good, but it's about seeing when these qualities are present or when they're not present. And if they're not present, or if this particular thing is causing us discomfort or suffering or dissatisfaction, or gee, I wish I were better, and I wish I wouldn't lie so much. Why am I even lying at all? I would lie on a regular basis, not because I got a kick out of it, but because I was afraid. I was afraid that I would get into trouble or you would yell at me. If I made a mistake at if I made a mistake at work, I was terrified of admitting it, because what would happen? I thought I'd get fired. So I would elaborate, embellish, rationalize, do anything I could to get out of just being totally truthful and honest. And it caused a lot of discomfort. It's not fun to live in that web of deceit. I didn't call it a web of deceit, but that's what it was. Looking back on it, it certainly was. Creating scenarios that you have to then live into. So if I were looking at myself 30 years ago, I would say, maybe we want to work on truthfulness. So that was causing suffering. So that's where I move into. That's kind of how we work with these qualities, bring them into a lens. Generosity is an antidote to greed. So, and craving and clinging. Letting go, renunciation is also an antidote to greed and craving and clinging. So practicing, renunciation is not about doing something to be a good person, but it's about recognizing that holding on if holding on causes suffering, letting go leads to the end of suffering. So we want to examine our behaviors to see if it takes us towards suffering or away from suffering. Takes us towards dissatisfaction or away from dissatisfaction, towards satisfaction and ease. So it's really, really important to pay attention always. And one of the paramis is equanimity, which is what we were doing in the meditation. And that's the ability to greet whatever arises with this balance, with this appropriate response. We're not blown over by what shows up. We're not blown away by anything. I mean, we feel it. We might experience the emotions that go along with whatever experiences. We have grief when there's loss and so on and so forth, but we're not entangled in it, or as Tara Brach says, entranced by it. We're, lost in this trance of delusion and thinking X, Y, or Z. There's a freedom that comes when we can sit with equanimity. That's the root of an undefended heart. We don't have to defend ourselves against anything. We can just be. I mentioned that my first intention setting was back in 2005 or 2006. I think it was 2005. And I hadn't done any thinking about what I wanted my intention to be. I just kind of wanted it to be spontaneous. I actually didn't even know what to expect. So I didn't even think about thinking about an intention. And so when I was there was a meditation that was led. And what came up for me was this intention to be compassionate to all beings, including myself. And it was really a surprise because I don't think the word compassion was in my vocabulary, especially not towards myself. And I think I know where it came from because I had spent the prior year reading and working with Sharon Salzberg's book, Loving Kindness. So I had been imbued with the practice of metta, loving kindness for self, compassion for self. But I didn't carry it around with me on a regular basis, but it had been in there. So when this intention came up to be compassionate, I said, okay, how does that work? And so when I would go through my day, if I found myself being berating myself in my head or being self-critical in some way, shape, or form, and I could be really nasty or harsh, I had to stop and say, that's not compassionate, And I didn't even know what it meant sometimes to be compassionate. If it's not in your vocabulary, it's like, what does it even feel like? And so this is not about getting something overnight, but instead it's about, wait a minute, this is where I'm not being compassionate. This kind of language, this kind of thought, this kind of whatever is getting in the way of compassion. How do I let go of that? How do I get rid of it? Or how to make room for different behaviors? So it's moving in a different direction. It's not, accomplishing a goal by February 17th. Instead, it's changing our lives to move in a different direction. That's beneficial. That takes us away from discomfort and suffering for ourselves. And then the more we can be compassionate for ourselves, the more we can be compassionate with others. So it is a practice for the benefit of all. As we develop this clarity and this kindness and this awareness for ourselves, we develop it and hold others in the same light. When we begin to develop this clarity, this wisdom, which is another one of the paramis, we can really begin to see what gets in the way. And it's this continual training ourselves to be more aware. And that's what we do when we practice. Oh, I'm caught up in that thought again. I'm caught up in that thought again. I'm caught up in that thought again. And this brings up another one of the paramis, which is patience. As I said, this is not like, okay, I'm going to do this and accomplish this by February 17th. It's a gradual movement towards, so it's going to take time. We want instant gratification. I always call it the microwave miracle. I want it now. Give me 3 steps, give me 5 steps, give me 7 steps, give me 12 steps. You can find books with all of those things, 7 steps to be highly effective people or whatever it is. And if you get it down and you do all the exercises in the book, you'll have a money back guarantee and you will be a better person and you will live happily ever after. But it doesn't always work that way. As I'm sure you all know. Okay, one of my favorite stories around this, Matthew, maybe you were in this class, I don't know, but I facilitate a Year to Live group pretty regularly. And we usually build an altar in the class where people bring in something meaningful for them. So we have a class altar. And one year, this woman came in with 2 or 3 shopping bags full of self-help books. And she put them on the altar and she said, I'm done with them. Because she had read all these 5 ways to do this and 10 ways to do this, and none of them worked. It's like you read it and it's like, because it's attacking from the outside rather than really being wise and sitting with and saying, what's meaningful for me right now? Patience is a problem. Truthfulness is a difficulty. Compassion, equanimity, loving kindness, all of those things. It's a very different lens with which to set an intention to move forward. A very important one of the paramis is sila, or ethical behavior, living with integrity. And that teaching is contained within the Eightfold Path. There's a whole section of the Eightfold Path on ethical behavior, not killing, not causing harm to another or ourselves. We've got to keep ourselves in this. Being wise and truthful with our speech. There's truthfulness in there. I mean, they all kind of go together and support each other. Being careful with our sexuality. Not taking what's not offered. Not ingesting anything that leads to mindlessness. Thich Nhat Hanh expands it. Traditionally, it's drugs and alcohol, but Thich Nhat Hanh expands it to, what are you ingesting? What are you reading? What are you hearing? What are you listening to that causes confusion, that is harmful? And to be cautious about that. And practice some letting go, renunciation around the things that do cause harm. And how do you move through the world wisely? Bringing these things in. This is the foundation that we set up for ourselves. So it's not out there. It's with us. It's this deep foundation. This, yeah, that's the word that's coming from me. It's this core that's there, that we're chipping away all the crap, all the stuff we've been told and taught, the condition to believe, and instead allow ourselves to find a truer path that's wise and skillful and liberatory, both for ourselves and for others. And so just briefly, I want to go over the paramis again, and maybe listen as I talk to them and see which resonate with you, because not all of them resonate with all of us. And one point I want to make, there's a series of tales called the Jataka tales, which are later addition to, it's not included in the Pali Canon, and they're fables, and they're supposed to be about the Buddha's lives before he took birth as Siddhartha Gautama. And there are over 500 of them, 500 Jataka tales. And each of them are supposed to be a parable about how he developed these qualities. So that's a shorthand way of saying it takes a long time. Because if each of those tales was a lifetime, that's a long time. So it's just like, don't expect to happen overnight. So there's patience and compassion for ourselves as we move through this, because we all are deeply conditioned, deeply impacted by the world we live in. And it takes time to extricate ourselves from this and to see more clearly where we struggle and where we cause harm. And so see which one of these resonate, or if any of these resonate. Generosity, which is an antidote to greed. It's not just about financial generosity, but it's about generosity of time. It's about generosity of love, generosity of presence, generosity of spirit. How can we be generous? And where do we cling? Where do we hold on? Morality and virtue, sila, living with integrity, making that a point of our lives. It's a gift to others when we live with integrity, because we make it safe for them to be around us, or we provide an avenue for folks to begin to feel safe around us, because we're not going to cause harm. Renunciation, which is letting go. It's not martyrdom. It's about seeing where we're stuck, seeing where we're suffering, and being willing to let go of what causes suffering so that we move to a place of not suffering. Wisdom, seeing clearly that things are impermanent, that there is discomfort. It's not if we do it right, it'll be perfect. It's that we all experience the human condition and that we're all conditioned beings. Energy, recognizing when we are caught up in that energy or effort, recognizing when we're caught up in the mind, the fixed views, the unwholesome thoughts, and being willing to let them go and cultivate, being willing to spend the time. No, that doesn't serve. I'm going to let it go and come back. I'm going to come back to now. It's really the mind can be very seductive. And it's so easy to get lost in our ideas of shoulds and coulds and woulds, and instead just come back to right here. Patience. Patience. Gil Fronsdal, teacher in Northern California, said, it's easy to be patient when things are going your way. So when things aren't going your way, where's your patience? Truthfulness. This is also part of wise speech. Is it true what we're saying? Is it necessary? Is it kind? Is it the right time? Really important to have that integrity of speech. So important, because we can cause so much harm otherwise. Determination, staying the course in spite of the messiness of life. Loving kindness. We open our heart. We see everyone is in the same boat. And we wish everyone well. It's this unconditional love that is so important. In the Metta Sutta, the Buddha says, we wish everyone goodwill, omitting none. Everyone, omitting none. And then equanimity is this wise response to whatever happens, this ease that we have in the world. And I think when we develop all these different qualities, it just leads to loving kindness. It leads to equanimity. So they support each other. And setting the intention to move in this direction is important, because in the Dhammapada, which is some of the collections of the Buddha's teachings, the first two talk about the importance of the mind. The mind precedes all our thinking. And if a person with unwise thoughts, if a person with an unwise mind or an unwholesome mind speaks or acts, suffering follows them like a wheel that follows the foot of an ox. On the other hand, if a person with a wholesome mind or a wise mind speaks or acts, happiness follows like his never departing shadow. So mind follows mind. Where we set our intention, that's the direction we move in. And my friend Kevin Griffin says, intention gives clarity, direction, and resolve on the path. With right intention, we are never entirely lost, no matter how much we stray. Right intention guides us back to ourselves and the values of kindness and wisdom. And then my favorite, favorite, favorite saying about intention is intention leads to action, and action leads to habit, and habit leads to character, and character leads to destiny. So how we move our minds, setting an intention to be wholesome, to be wise, to be loving, using these paramis as a container, as a way to give some guidance, I think is really helpful, really beneficial. And I invite you as we move into this new year to maybe reflect on some of these and what are uh, some that can be beneficial for you, or now or later, or just kind of chew on them for a while. So thank you so much for your attention, my friends. I hope this has been of some benefit.